In 1980, Puerto Rico was home to 3.2 million people, about the same as South Carolina. But whereas South Carolina gained another 2 million residents over the next 50 years, Puerto Rico gained just 2,000 people, another 705 to be exact, a net increase of 8% or 61 people a year. In that time, the island experienced a spectacular rise, followed by a spectacular and unprecedented fall. It went from surpassing the economic growth of the US mainland during the Reagan and dot-com booms to a 15-year period of negative growth dubbed a death spiral by its former governor. So, how did Puerto Rico's economic future become so bleak so fast?
It is important to acknowledge that Puerto Rico's fiscal conditions have improved since 2016. Puerto Rico has restructured most of its debt. The most recent government-wide audited financial statements from fiscal year 2022 show a total net surplus of $1.9 billion, a reversal from prior years, which predominantly had net deficits. While most recent audited financial statements are not yet available, Puerto Rico officials reported to us that the government has not issued any tax-supported debt unrelated to restructuring since 2022. Additionally, in 2024, FOMB cited the territory's progress in aligning revenues and expenditures and stabilizing its finances.
By the late 1940s, Puerto Rico had been a U.S. territory for nearly half a century. Unlike the rest of the American economy, however, it remained almost entirely dominated by agriculture. Pressure began growing to close this gap, to develop the island into something more than a giant sugarcane plantation, particularly during the Cold War. With communist Cuba less than 500 miles away, this tiny appendage of the U.S. took on ideological and geopolitical significance. Thus came Operation Bootstrap, a multi-decade campaign to transform Puerto Rico into a modern, industrial, export-oriented economy in the style of Hong Kong or South Korea. One component of this was Section 936 of the U.S. Tax Code. Section 936 lowered the federal income tax to zero on money earned in Puerto Rico. This, at the time, was revolutionary. U.S. corporations were then only beginning to experiment with outsourcing. Puerto Rico gave them a chance to test it, offering cheap labor, generous tax breaks, and access to U.S. markets. But this was especially lucrative for one industry, pharmaceuticals. Because drug pricing is largely tied to patents, companies could shift profits to Puerto Rico where they were tax-free. A U.S. parent company could transfer intellectual property to its Puerto Rican subsidiary and attribute most of a drug's value to that patent, effectively moving profits offshore without leaving U.S. jurisdiction. At the same time, manufacturing the product itself could be done cheaply on the island, satisfying regulatory requirements. By 1990, 17 of the top 21 drugs in the U.S. were made in Puerto Rico. Manufacturing became nearly 40% of the island's GDP. But there was a problem. It all depended on policy. When the Cold War ended, Puerto Rico lost much of its strategic importance. Section 936 began to look like an expensive subsidy. Instead of reforming it, Congress phased it out entirely, completing the process in 2006. Companies left for Ireland, Mexico, and China. Then came the Great Recession. By 2013, 230,000 jobs had disappeared. The economy was shrinking, but government spending remained high. Puerto Rico's constitution technically required a balanced budget, but due to a translation loophole, revenues were interpreted to include borrowed money. This allowed the government to take on massive debt, not for investment, but for day-to-day expenses. Over time, it began borrowing to repay old debt. By 2015, Puerto Rico owed $73 billion, or $120 billion including pensions. Per capita, this was far higher than any U.S. state. Investors had continued lending because Puerto Rican bonds were triple tax exempt and widely believed to be backed implicitly by the U.S. government. But after Detroit declared bankruptcy in 2013 without a bailout, confidence collapsed. Puerto Rico's bonds were downgraded to junk status and borrowing costs surged. Soon after, the government admitted it was in a death spiral.
Continued focus on financial management fundamentals is critical to maintain momentum in Puerto Rico. Actions needed for the road ahead include, as we just heard, consecutive balanced budgets. Balanced budgets are required as a statutory condition in PROMESA. Balanced budgets lay a foundation for revenues and expenditures that avoid deficits that then contribute to debt. Agreement on a balanced budget to begin fiscal year 2026 is an important development. In addition, budgets are now evaluated throughout the year to ensure that sufficient funding is available to cover expenses. The government also adopted a debt management policy in 2022 to help guard against unsustainable borrowing. The second action that continues to be needed is sound financial management. The government of Puerto Rico and FOMB have worked to strengthen financial management.
A deal was eventually reached. Puerto Rico would restructure its debt, and in return, an oversight board would control its budget. Spending cuts followed, reduced pensions, fewer benefits, and tighter public services. But Puerto Rico had one key difference from other struggling economies. Its people could leave. As U.S. citizens, they could move freely to the mainland, and many did. Each year, tens of thousands relocated to places like Florida and New York. Today, more Puerto Ricans live on the mainland than on the island. Those who leave are often younger and more skilled, shrinking the workforce and tax base even further. This creates a feedback loop. Fewer workers mean less economic activity, which leads to more people leaving.
The government of Puerto Rico and FOMB have worked to strengthen financial management. Puerto Rico began implementing an enterprise resource planning system in 2022. The system is intended to streamline essential data reporting systems such as financial accounts and payroll. There have been delays. Puerto Rico's auditors reported that they expect full implementation of the system will resolve a significant portion of the financial reporting and internal control issues. The government also continues to experience financial statement delays and issues obtaining clean audit opinions. Financial statements for 2023 and 2024 were not yet available as of June 30th, 2025. Several departments also have recurring audit findings related to financial reporting and federal awards. Third and finally, while Puerto Rico's fiscal conditions have improved, the territory continues to face long-standing fiscal and economic risks. In addition to financial management issues, these risks include, as we just heard, access to reliable and affordable electricity, pension and other post-employment benefit liabilities, increasingly powerful storms, and population changes that affect revenue and economic activity. Policy decisions to manage these risks need to occur in tandem with actions to support fiscal stability and economic growth. Among the decisions that previously led to deficits were insufficiently addressing public pension funding and inadequately managing the electric utilities' financial condition. These areas remain works in progress, and continued attention is needed to bolster efforts to address underfunded pension liabilities and a power grid that is unreliable and costly.
Puerto Rico now faces a difficult cycle. It needs economic growth to stop population decline, but it needs population stability to achieve economic growth. Despite various efforts, reversing this trend has proven extremely difficult. And unless that cycle is broken, the island's long-term outlook remains uncertain.